Morning to Destiny Worship Center, where you matter.
We are so excited to have you here to worship with us today. Please take a moment to share our page with your family and friends. If you have any prayer requests, let us know in the comments. Or you can go to DWCCC.org and select resources to send a private prayer request to our prayer team. If you would like to partner with Destiny financially as we continue to do kingdom work, you can give in the following ways. 1, you can give through Givelify, Destiny Worship Center, Lancaster, Texas. 2, you can give through Cashapp, which is $DestinyWcc2. Or 3rd, you can give through our website, DWCCC.org. Select online giving. Or you can drop it off at the church on Sundays from 11 a.m. to 12:30. May you please join us in a word of prayer. Lord, we come to you as humble as we know how. First, I'm just thanking you, Lord. Thank you for your mercy and your grace on our lives, dear God. Thank you for your traveling grace, dear Lord. Thank you for your help and your strength that you give us on the daily, dear God. God, we just invite you into this service, dear God, that you just get the glory out of everything that takes place today, God. God,
job, on break, in the car, on the side of the road, wherever we are, God, I pray that you would reach us with your word. Because we know that your word says that it cannot come back void. So I pray that not only will it find us, but it will change us. It will revive us, it will renew us, and it will strengthen and empower us. We thank you for this day, a day that we've never seen, and a day that we won't see again. So I pray, since it's a new day, do something new in it. In the mighty name of Jesus that we pray. Amen. 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 Excited to be back in the house of God. I know we're not all back in the house of God due to us trying to be safe and responsible. We have taken our worship services back virtual, but we know that we serve a God who reaches. And so whether we're in the house or in our own house, we know that there is not only a word from the Lord, but that same word will find you where you are. And so, coming from the book of Exodus, the 13th chapter. Book of Exodus, the 13th chapter. We're just going to take two verses 17 and 18. But before I dive in, I want to issue a challenge to everybody under the sound of my voice, whether you are here, whether you're watching me online, whenever you watch me online. My challenge for you in 2022 is to take notes. Take notes. Too many in the house of God come for inspiration and not information. They come for motivation and not education. In other words, you come to feel something, but you don't come to learn nothing. And there's too many people in the house of God that get into a fight with the enemy and have no frame of reference because you don't have nothing to reference. If you can only come into the house of God and you can only log in and say, I want to feel the move of God, but it didn't move you into anything, you missed it. So in this year, I ain't coming to entertain you. I'm coming to empower you. I'm coming to strengthen you. And I'm coming to prepare you. Because the enemy ain't worried about you. Not because you're not saved, but because you'll shout but you won't write. So I need you to understand that the fight for your faith is predicated on, are you armed or unarmed? Because you forgot what you should have written. So my challenge this year, take notes. Coming from the book of Exodus, the 13th chapter, 2 verses 17 and 18. And it reads as such, when Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them on the road through Philistine country, though that was shorter. For God said, if they face war, they may change their minds and return to Egypt. So God led the people around the desert road toward the Red Sea. The Israelites went up out of Egypt ready for battle. When they finally got free, God didn't lead them the short way. He took them the long way because he said, if I take them the short way, if they face war too soon, I know it says they ready for battle, but they ain't really ready for battle. If I take them through Philistine country, they'll change their mind and go right back into what I brought them out of. So I'm going to take them the long way towards the Red Sea. I want to use as a subject for a little while, coming out of this thought that Pastor wants to talk about, that this is our winning season, that you can't win. I'm sorry, that your win is in the wilderness. Your win is in the wilderness. You can be seated in the presence of God wherever you are. You can be seated. I need to let you know your win is in the wilderness. I I ain't come to a place where I need to let you guys know right now that some breakthroughs happen not because you're in pain or because time has passed, but because you finally got tired of allowing your tongue to be paralyzed. I'm going to say that again. Some breakthroughs happen not because you're in pain, not because there's time that has passed, but because you finally got tired of allowing your tongue to be paralyzed. It's in the text. Let's set the stage. We know in Exodus that they were in bondage for a long time. The text says over 400 years. And God did not move. God did not deliver. God did not send a deliverer until they asked for one. It's in the text. Exodus 3 says that when he was speaking to Moses, the text says, I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I'm concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and bring them up out of that land and into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey. Could it be that they could have got delivered sooner if they would only open their mouth? Could it be that they were silent because they didn't think God could do anything? But please don't miss this, because you need to understand that the God you see, the God you know, the God you believe is the one that you get. Okay, in Matthew 13 it says that Jesus couldn't perform miracles in his hometown, catch it, not because he wasn't able, but because they weren't open. In other words, some people won't be able to benefit from Jesus, not because Jesus isn't God, but because they see Jesus as carpenter. It says in the text, only a few God was available for many, because some people saw who he was. Other people saw what he could be for them. Let me put it this way. If you see a carpenter, you can get your house fixed. If you see the Christ, you can get your life fixed. And so there's times when we miss God, not because God ain't there, but because we don't see him the right way. It wasn't until they cried out and said, deliver us, that they finally saw Christ. They finally saw God as deliverer. And so we see in the text that when they cried out to God, God had a conversation with Moses. I'll say that again. They cried out to God for deliverance. And God had a private conversation on the side of a mountain with Moses. They were talking to God. God was talking about them to Moses. They were crying out, problem. God was having a sidebar solution. Sometimes when you talk to God about your problem, instead of giving you an answer, he will start talking to your answer. That's good, but it's incomplete. Because we need to understand that you can't microwave some miracles. What does that mean? That the season of announcement isn't always your season of pronouncement. Okay. Let me put it a different way. When I was about to get married, my wife and I sent out wedding announcements. We sent these announcements out so people would know that we were engaged and planning to be married. But there was still no aisle. We had sent out announcements, but ain't no flower girl walking over. We had sent out announcements, but had nobody come into a building. We had announced it, but there had been no pronouncement. It was announced, creating anticipation, but it hadn't been pronounced, put in a period. And some of us are stuck in a season where God has announced some things over your life, and you're stuck and you're frustrated because it's been announced, but it hasn't been pronounced. God needs to understand. God is trying to figure out, can I trust you with an announcement before you get to your pronouncement? Can I trust you with we're engaged before we get to now I pronounce you man and wife? And some of us are struggling like the Israelites with the fact that we know that there's a deliverer coming. But when I wake up, I'm still in Egypt. What do you do What do you do when Moses has showed up, but you're still living under Pharaoh's rule? What do you do when you know that there is more for you and more coming and more inside you, and I've been promised more, but it hasn't been pronounced yet? We get excited about announcement, but we can get paralyzed waiting on the pronouncement. And see, so it's good when you finally get to a place where Pharaoh finally says, just go. Just go. The text says that they finally been freed, but God puts them on a weird path. He says that the path through Philistine country will be shorter, but they're not ready for what they think they're ready for. They think they're ready for war, but they're not really ready for war. So instead of taking them down the path towards Philistine country, I'm going to take them down a path that will lead them to the Red Sea. And we know what happens when they get to the Red Sea. The text says when they get to the Red Sea, they look at what's in front of them, catch it, and Pharaoh changes his mind. So they find themselves in a place saying, why did you bring us here? There was a path that we could have taken, one that would have been shorter, two that would have left us stuck. We could have stayed where we were for this. Because now all I see is a Red Sea. Often the problem you're facing can make you forget the problem you've already been delivered from. See, sometimes we deal with and suffer from spiritual amnesia. When we encounter a new problem, we can forget the old problem that God brought us out of. Catch it, and here's where most of us are, because the text says when they saw the Red Sea in front of them and Pharaoh's army behind them, they complained that you brought us here to die. And if we were going to die here, we would have been better off living in bondage there. In other words, I'll take the bondage I know. I'll take the hurt I know. I'll take the pain I know over the hope that has now disappointed me. And many in the house of God have been hurt so much and been in pain so much and been let down so much that you prefer familiar pain over growing pains. You prefer the hurt that you know than the hope that you don't. But God sent me on assignment to remind you that even in the midst of that hurt, He's still a hedge. Don't miss it. In the next chapter, in verse 19, it says, then the angel of God, who had been traveling in front of Israel's army, withdrew and went behind them. The pillar of cloud also moved from in front and stood behind them, coming between the armies of Egypt and Israel. Throughout the night, the cloud brought darkness to one side and light to the other. So neither went near the other all night long. The enemy was close, the people complained, and God covered. The enemy was close, the people complained because of what they saw, and yet God covered. See, this is what happened in Job. When Satan was looking for someone's life to destroy, looking for someone's life to devour, and God said, have you considered Job? The enemy said, yes, I have, but you have a hedge around him, catching and everything connected to him. I missed this the first time I read it. Satan said, you put a hedge there, not God. Say it again. Satan said, there's a hedge around him. God never said, I'll put a hedge there. Well, what does that mean? It means that not only had the enemy considered Job, but he'd been scouting him. He didn't need God to tell him that there was a hedge there because he had already tried to get him. Could it be that you have no idea how many times the enemy has tried to come to kill you, to take you out, to snatch you up and devour you, but he couldn't get to you because all the while there was a hedge protecting you. He had no idea how many times he got close, but God had you covered. Came close on your job, but God had you covered. Came close to your marriage, but God had you covered. Came close to your kids, but God had you covered. Was asleep behind the wheel and woke up right at the last minute and said, whoa, that was close. You wasn't close. God had you covered. It could be. Then in those moments that you thought were close, it was just God covering you. And that's good because the covering is important. Without the covering, there wouldn't have been time for the miracle to take place. And I never realized when I read it the first time, because what I thought was done immediately was done in intervals. The text says that it took all night for the wind to part the Red Sea. See, when we watch the Prince of Egypt and we watch these illustrations of what happened, we think that he stretched out his hand or the staff hit the sea and it parted immediately. But the text says that the Lord sent a strong east wind and it took all night. Now, I thought that was interesting because if it was a strong wind, why did it take all night? If it is a strong wind, and we know biblically wind in the Hebrew is pneuma, which is spirit, which is representative of the Holy Spirit. Why would it take the Holy Spirit all night to do something that he could have done immediately? Catch it, because the wind wasn't just for the water, the wind was for the walk. Okay. God in his omniscience knew that parting the sea would get them out, but the mud would get them stuck. So he is so much God that he used the wind not just to make a way, but to drive away. Okay. The text says that they walked through on dry ground. Isaiah put it this way, that you go before me and make the crooked path straight. Isaiah is saying God is so much God. I can walk a crooked path because I'm a crooked person, but God is so much God that he's considerate of the path that I take. So not only was he thinking about parting the sea, but he was thinking about making sure that they could walk through with ease. Can I go deeper? Paul in 1 Corinthians says that this moment, this parting of the Red Sea, the Israelites coming through, was symbolic. It was a metaphor of baptism. Okay. The ground had to be dry because mud leaves tracks. It leaves a trace. It leaves evidence. Mud is dirty. It shows mess. It leaves you messy. It shows that you've been in some dirty places, been in some dirty surroundings, dealt with some dirty situations. If there was mud, you could have seen where I've been. You could have seen what I've come out of. You would have seen evidence of who I was, the mistakes I've made, the times I came short. But because there was a wind, they turned it into dry ground. When they came out on the other side, there was no track, no trace, no evidence of what they came through. In other words, because this was a metaphor for baptism, I had to make it as such that when you come through, people don't know what you came out of. That's why they said the blood still works, because when I get washed with the blood, you don't even know what I've done. You don't know the mistakes I've made. You don't know the mess I've been in, because it leaves no track, trace, or evidence. So God wasn't just worried about the water. He was setting them up for the walk. So God sent the wind not just for your escape, but because there would be no evidence. Catch it, not just for the people who saw you, but for the you who would see you. Because one of the things that we struggle with most, and it was in the text, is coming out of Egypt, but still feeling like an Egyptian. That there are some places, people, and things that God has delivered us from that we still have a way of identifying with if we can still see a trace. And I can imagine as they were walking through, looking up at sea on the left side and sea on the right side, expecting to see an army behind them and wondering, how is it that I'm walking on dry ground where water used to be? Not only being impressed, but confused. Where are we going? Catch it, and why are we going this way? At the end of last year, my wife and I, we took a cruise, and so my kids stayed with my parents. And the first day that they were supposed to go to school, my mom was driving, and my daughter said, "Mimi, are you lost?" And my mom laughed. She said, "No, why?" And she said, "Because this ain't the way to get to my school. It usually doesn't take this long, and when I look out the window, I don't see any of the stuff I'm used to seeing, so I just figured you were lost." And my mom took it and said, "No, this is the right way." And my daughter, as only she can, if you've ever met my daughter, there's never been a problem she was wrong about. So she said, "But Mimi, I'm just saying, I'm not sure." And my mom told her something that I've heard her tell me before. She said, "I don't need you to be sure or understand because I'm driving." There are times where we don't know the path God has us on. But it's okay because you're not driving. Philosopher Kierkegaard said that life is lived forward, but only understood backwards. In other words, sometimes I won't understand until I overcome. So here's why. Make it make sense. Pharaoh sees them cross and says, since they can cross on dry ground, me and my army can cross on dry ground. And we know the story. They go through, the water collapses, and they drown. Why? Because you drown when you try to follow a word that God didn't give you. Let me say that again for the people who missed it. If you're not careful, you can drown trying to follow a word that God never gave you. That's why I think it's interesting when people talk about the disciples that stayed in the boat. They had to stay in the boat because Peter was very specific. He said, "Lord, if it's you, let me, not us, let me come to you." And Jesus said, "Come." That come was for Peter. So had they gotten out of the boat, they would have sank because that was not their word. There are some people that are guilty of drowning, not because God wanted you to drown, but because you were trying to walk on something that wasn't meant for you. That's not your word. We got friends that quit their job and started a business and said, "Well, maybe I need to quit my job and start my own business." That wasn't your word. People leaving relationships too early, that wasn't your word. God wanted you to fight for your marriage, not them. There are some words that we try to follow that were never meant for us, and we find ourselves drowning when we were never meant to. People found themselves confused because they had to go the long way. they not felt the despair of being trapped by the sea, or the angst of an approaching army, and saw the awe of walking through on dry ground, Pharaoh would not only be a threat, catch it, he would still be an option. Because the Red Sea made them forget, but God wouldn't let them falter. The text says that not only were they not ready for war, but they would want to go back. God took them that way. Not because they were ever in any doubt of drowning, but because God needed to drown the very thing that would always come after them, catch it, and that they would try to get back to. The reason why your wind is in the wilderness is because God needed to get all of Egypt out of you so you wouldn't go back into Egypt. Please understand, because Pharaoh wasn't just bad, he was generationally bad. Text says it was 400 years, which means mamas and daddies and grandparents and great-grandparents and great-grandparents all had lived through the same thing. So this wind in the wilderness isn't just about you, it's about your kids' kids. Catch it. My great-grandparents saw chains as bondage. My kids see them as fashion. What they saw as salary, my kids will see as paychecks. What they saw as houses, my kids will see as storage. Why? Because the wind that they walked through set the stage of breaking generational curses. You walking and getting the wind in the wilderness ain't just about you. Because you got to understand, you are your ancestors' wildest dreams. But you are only walking in what they had the stamina to keep walking through. I'm done, but I can hear you. Because you usually don't find winds in the wilderness. I get it. In fact, if you read the text, it still feels like they took a lot of losses. Some of you feel like even going into a new year that you're still taking losses. And I know two of the biggest losses that people feel like they're taking is I'm weary and I'm wounded. I'm tired and I'm hurt. And PJ, it's not just that my feet are tired of walking, but my spirit is tired of believing. And so this ain't just feet fatigue, it's faith fatigue. And maybe I could be strong for me if I wasn't trying to be strong for so many people. Maybe I would still have faith to believe if some of the stuff that I was believing for had manifested. I don't want to quit, but if I'm honest, I don't want to keep hoping anymore. I don't want to keep being disappointed. I don't want to keep getting let down. I don't want to keep going into new year after new year after new year expecting something different and still getting the same result. I hear you, but I'm weary. I'm not just weary to my body, I'm weary to my spirit, which is why Jesus said, come to me. And I will give you rest. Catch it, not just for your body, but I'll give you rest for your soul. Because there's some fatigue that sleep won't fix. There's some fatigue that an Epsom salt bath won't fix. There's some fatigue that goes deeper than that. And Jesus says, I will give you rest for your soul. But that that's not it. That's not the hard part. And I didn't see it until I went back and read it again. That you see the liberation of Israel in Exodus, but you don't see the full ramifications of their limitations until Numbers. The impact of that bondage was revealed in Numbers 13, when they finally get an opportunity to walk into the very thing God brought them to. It says they get to the edge of Canaan and they see people and they view them as giants and said, they are giants and we're grasshoppers. Who told you you was a grasshopper? Who told you you was less than? But you see the evidence of their self-esteem because they see themselves as they were in Egypt, not ready to go in Canaan. It wasn't an issue of promise. It was an issue of perspective because they were hurt. And one of the things about being in a fight, catch it if you've ever been in a fight, there are times when you finally get out of it and you say, I'm bleeding, and you didn't even realize it because when you were in the fight, you didn't have time to hurt. They had been in Egypt for so long and in pain for so long that the pain felt normal. And there's somebody under the sound of my voice, you can't walk into Canaan, not because your feet don't work, but because your heart don't work. You can't see you no more. So when God sees a giant, I see a grasshopper. I would walk, but I'm wounded. I'm hurt. And I didn't even know I was hurt because I had been in pain for so long that it just felt like a regular day. But God said in this year, the wilderness that you were in is setting you up for the wind that you will have. Let me connect the dots. There were two people that refused to see themselves as grasshoppers. The Bible says that Joshua and Caleb said, I don't know about them. And we've been through some stuff too. But we serve a God that parted the Red Sea and let us walk through on dry ground. If he can do that, what can he do? Here's the hard part. They believed it and had to go back into the wilderness and walk. They didn't even go into the promised land. They had to go back and walk. Here's the shout. The very thing they had to go back in and do was the same thing God used when they walked around Jericho's walls. Could it be that your wind is in the wilderness because it built in you the experience, the tenacity, the stamina to do something that otherwise you wouldn't be able to do? So when you walk through the wilderness this time, I'm telling you to walk through knowing this is how I get my wind. It wasn't because of the trumpet. It was because they had the faith to walk around something that they should have been trying to blow up. But they said, God, I trust you so much that if you say walk, I'll walk. Your wind is in the wilderness. And I know you wanted to go the short way. I know it's felt like a long time. And you've been through a lot. And for some of you, when you finally came out, it was the first time you realized, I'm hurt. I'm bleeding. I have lack. I'm incomplete. But God said, don't allow your wound, don't allow your hurt to make you lose focus. Don't allow what you've been through to allow you to miss what I'm trying to take you to. And I realize that even in the wilderness, I have a wind with your name on it. And that if you can walk when you're weary, if you can walk when you're wounded, if you can walk to get Egypt out, there's a Canaan with your name on it. God, I thank you. I thank you for your word. I pray right now that everybody who's felt like they've been walking in circles, walking for the mistakes of others, walking for the doubts of others, I pray that you would be rest for their weary souls. I pray your word will be planted. It would take root and it would bear fruit in their lives. That in seasons when they doubt, in seasons when they worry, in seasons when they don't know where you are and what you're doing, that they would have something to reference back to that reminds them that the God of Egypt is the God of Dallas. So I pray right now for your people. I thank you for using marred clay, messed up clay, to speak a word on your behalf. And we're excited about what you're going to do with it. Because your word says that Paul may have planted and Apollos may have watered, but you, Lord, bring the increase. So I pray right now that you would bring increase. In the mighty name of Jesus that we pray. Amen. Amen. If you have heard this word, heard this message, experienced this service, and you realize that you are out of communion with Christ, and if he came back, you don't know where your eternal resting place would be. We invite you right where you are to repeat after me. Lord, I'm sorry. Forgive me. I've sinned and fallen short of you. But I love you. And I believe that your son came, born of a virgin, lived, suffered, bled, and died just for me. I believe that he got up 3 days later with all power in his hands, just for me. And I believe that he sits at your right hand, ready to welcome me. If you said that and you believe it in your heart, the Bible says that at this very moment you are saved, and we're excited, and we're welcoming you into the body of believers. If you've watched this service and you want a place to call home, we invite you to consider Destiny Worship tonight, where we believe a mighty move of God is taking place right where we are, and we believe that you matter. And if you need special prayer, we have people right now ready, willing, and able to pray with you, pray for you. Just drop in the chat right now, I need prayer. Drop in the chat, I need prayer. We have somebody that will intercede on your behalf. Thank you, God. We thank God for this day. We thank God that you took time out of your day to fellowship with us. We invite you to continue checking us
Partner with us by